Verses 7 to 15. They were sick of the good provision God had made for them, v6. It was bread from heaven, angels' food. To show how unreasonable their complaint was, it is here described, v7 to 9. It was good for food, and pleasant to the eye, every grain like an orient pearl, it was wholesome food and nourishing, it was not to be called dry bread, for it tasted like fresh oil, it was agreeable, the Jews say, Wis 16:20, to every man's palate, and tasted as he would have it, and, though it was still the same, yet, by the different ways of dressing it, it yielded them a grateful variety, it cost them no money, nor care, for it fell in the night, while they slept, and the labor of gathering it was not worth speaking of, they lived upon free quarter, and yet could talk of Egypt's cheapness and the fish they ate there freely. Nay, which was much more valuable than all this, the manna came from the immediate power and bounty of God, not from common providence, but from special favor. It was, as God's compassion, new every morning, always fresh, not as their food who live on shipboard. While they lived on manna, they seemed to be exempted from the curse which sin has brought on man, that in the sweat of his face should he eat bread. And yet they speak of manna with such scorn, as if it were not good enough to be meat for swine, our soul is dried away. They speak as if God dealt hardly with them in allowing them no better food. At first they admired it, ex 16:15. What is this? What a curious precious thing is this? But now they despised it. Note, peevish discontented minds will find fault with that which has no fault in it but that it is too good for them. It is very provoking to God to undervalue his favors, and to put a but upon our common mercies. Nothing but manna. Those that might be very happy often make themselves very miserable by their discontent. They could not be satisfied unless they had flesh to eat. They brought flocks and herds with them in great abundance out of Egypt, but either they were covetous, and could not find in their hearts to kill them, lest they should lessen their flocks, they must have flesh as cheap as they had bread, or they would not be pleased, or else they were curious, beef and mutton would not please them, they must have something more nice and delicate, like the fish they did eat in Egypt. Food would not serve, they must be feasted. They had feasted with God upon the peace offerings which they had their share of, but it seems God did not keep a table good enough for them, they must have daintier bits than any that came to his altar. Note, it is an evidence of the dominion of the carnal mind when we are solicitous to have all the delights and satisfactions of sense wound up to the height of pleasurableness. Be not desirous of dainties, Prov 23:1-3. If God gives us food convenient, we ought to be thankful, though we do not eat the fat and drink the sweet. They distrusted the power and goodness of God as insufficient for their supply, who will give us flesh to eat, taking it for granted that God could not. Thus this question is commented upon, PS 78:19, 20, can he provide flesh also? Though he had given them flesh with their bread once, when he saw fit, ex 16:13, and they might have expected that he would do it again, and in mercy, if, instead of murmuring, they had prayed. Note, it is an offense to God to let our desires go beyond our faith. They were eager and importunate in their desires, they lusted a lust, so the word is, lusted greatly and greedily, till they wept again for vexation. So childish were the children of Israel, and so humorsome, that they cried because they had not what they would have and when they would have it. They did not offer up this desire to God, but would rather be beholden to anyone else than to him. We should not indulge ourselves in any desire which we cannot in faith turn into prayer, as we cannot when we ask meat for our lust, PS 78:18. For this sin the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly against them, which is written for our admonition, that we should not lust after evil things as they lusted, 1 Cor 10:6. Flesh is good food, and may lawfully be eaten, yet they are said to lust after evil things. What is lawful of itself becomes evil to us when it is what God does not allot to us and yet we eagerly desire it. Moses himself, though so meek and good a man, is uneasy upon this occasion, Moses also was displeased. Now, it must be confessed that the provocation was very great. These murmurings of theirs reflected great dishonor upon God, and Moses laid to heart the reproaches cast on himself. They knew that he did his utmost for their good, and that he neither did nor could do anything without a divine appointment, and yet to be thus continually teased and clamored against by an unreasonable, ungrateful people would break in upon the temper even of Moses himself. God considered this, and therefore we do not find that he chided him for his uneasiness. Yet Moses expressed himself otherwise than became him upon this provocation, and came short of his duty both to God and Israel in these expostulations. He undervalues the honor God had put upon him, in making him the illustrious minister of his power and grace, in the deliverance and guidance of that peculiar people, which might have been sufficient to balance the burden. He complains too much of a sensible grievance, and lays too near his heart a little noise and fatigue. If he could not bear the toil of government, which was but running with the footmen, how would he bear the terrors of war, which was contending with horses? He might easily have furnished himself with considerations enough to enable him to slight their clamors, and make nothing of them. He magnifies his own performances, that all the burden of the people lay upon him, whereas God himself did in effect ease him of all the burden. Moses needed not to be in care to provide quarters for them, or victuals, God did all. And, if any difficult case happened, he needed not to be in any perplexity, while he had the oracle to consult, and in it the divine wisdom to direct him, the divine authority to back him and bear him out, and almighty power itself to dispense rewards and punishments. He is not so sensible as he ought to be of the obligation he lay under, by virtue of the divine commission and command, to do the utmost he could for his people, when he suggests that because they were not the children of his body therefore he was not concerned to take a fatherly care of them, though God himself, who might employ him as he pleased, had appointed him to be a father to them. He takes too much to himself when he asks, "Whence should I have flesh to give them?" v. 13, as if he were the housekeeper, and not God. Moses gave them not the bread, Jn 6:32. Nor was it expected that he should give them the flesh, but as an instrument in God's hand, and if he meant, whence should God have it for them? He too much limited the power of the Holy One of Israel. He speaks distrustfully of the divine grace when he despairs of being able to bear all this people, v. 14. Had the work been much less, he could not have gone through it in his own strength, but had it been much greater, through God strengthening him, he might have done it. It was worst of all passionately to wish for death, and desire to be killed out of hand, because just at this time his life was made a little uneasy to him, v. 15. Is this Moses? Is this the meekest of all the men on the earth? The best have their infirmities, and fail sometimes in the exercise of that grace for which they are most eminent. But God graciously overlooked Moses's passion at this time, and therefore we must not be severe in our animadversions upon it, but pray, Lord, lead us not into temptation,